So there is no disputing the existence of the conventional level of self that we all experience in our day-to-day life. Now, the question is, when we try to understand what that self or I really is, if we try to extend analysis a bit further, then we find that, for example, when we have a recollection of something happening when we were young, then you get a sort of, your recollection works like, yes, I experienced this, I saw this when I was young. So there is a kind of a close identification with the state of the body and the stage of your body and the stage of and your sense of self. When you're physically, when you were young, there is a self. When physically you get older, there is a self. And there is a self that also kind of pervades the both stages in time. You can, one individual can go back and recollect the experiences of youth. One individual can think about his or her experience during old age and so on. So there again we see a kind of a close identification with the bodily states and sense of self, our I consciousness. So the question is, since there is a continuity in time of something called self or something called I, a lot of philosophers, and particularly in the religious traditions, and this need to understand the nature of that individual, that being, which maintains its continuity across time, has been quite important. And especially within the Indian tradition, the non-Buddhist Indian schools talk about Atman, which is roughly translated as self or soul. And in other non-Indian traditions, in the religious traditions, we hear discussions about the soul of the being and so on. Now, in the Indian context, Atman has a very distinct understanding of an agent that is independent of the empirical facts of the individual. Because the idea is that, for example, like in the Hindu tradition, there is a belief in reincarnation. There is also, I found references in some of the mentions of certain forms of mystical practice which involves a consciousness or a soul assuming the body of a newly dead person. So these kind of ideas exist in the Indian tradition. So there has been a lot of debate about if we are to make sense of reincarnation, if we are to make sense of this soul assuming another body, then we must posit some kind of an independent agent that is independent of the empirical facts of the individuals. So on the whole, the non-Buddhist Indian schools have more or less come to the conclusion that the self, the true reference of our first person term like I and self, really refers to this independent self or Atman that is independent of our body and mind. Buddhist traditions on the whole have rejected that kind of temptation to posit a self or an Atman or soul independent of our body and mind. But having said that, even within the Buddhist schools, although there is a unanimity or a consensus on the point that self or I must be understood in terms of the aggregation of body and mind, but as to what exactly is the reference of when we say I or self, there has been again a diversity, divergence of opinions, even within the Buddhist thinkers. A lot of Buddhist schools maintain that ultimately, in the final analysis, we must identify the self or the I with the consciousness of the person, because through analysis we can show that how body is in some sense kind of the contingent fact, and it is that which continues across time is really the consciousness of the being. of course, other Buddhist thinkers have rejected that kind of move to identify self with consciousness.
다 산재장도 다와 잡아 라서부터 다게 어디 낭섬 대뭐 심벌 아니 다든 장아 집에 있는 최가능이야 말이지. 아다 지도자네 강사스대야 돼. 안돼도 출루디 낭섬 대뭐 심벌 다든 차네 다든 차 가서 자샤 뒤치는 야자네요 말이지. 저들이 메인도 산에다 마다 마제병 안에다 강사시 샤고리 근데 그래서 시고를 해봐이네 풍불로 떼네 딱섬시래지 풍불로 떼네다 주댕에다 풍불로 떼네 딱섬시다 다 대셔버리 지전에 강사하게 호랑이 집에 오랑 첨벌지 니야 자원이네 야말이지 강사 정도 마세베 추카다 강이나야 니야 야말이지
So other Buddhist thinkers such as Buddha Palita and Chantakirti have rejected this kind of metaphysical urge to seek some kind of eternal or abiding or enduring self. And they have argued that following that kind of path is, in a sense, succumbing to the kind of ingrained sort of need to grasp at something. So if one approaches the analysis of the nature of self through that path, there is nothing to be found, because the quest that is being involved here is a metaphysical quest for a metaphysical self. Whereas in reality, when we do that, in a sense, we are going beyond the domain of understanding of everyday language and everyday experience. So self and person and agency must be understood purely in terms of how we experience our sense of self. And so therefore, we should not go beyond the level of conventional understanding of self and person, and we should develop an understanding of our own existence in terms of our bodily and mental existence, so that self and person is in some sense understood as a designation dependent upon mind and body. So Chantakirti says in his Guide to the Middle Way that when you subject, for example, say the concept of chariot to analysis, trying to seek some kind of metaphysically or substantially real chariot that is independent of the parts that constitute the chariot, you're never going to find any chariot. But that does not entail that chariot generally does not exist. Similarly, when we subject the existence of self, the nature of self, through such analysis, we cannot find self or the I independent of the mind and body, which constitutes the existence of the individual or the being.
That's the chance of the right? 가족을 그게 라랑게 지다 풍부 차라라 때네 딱섬심마도 맞다 말이야.
So this understanding of self as a dependently originated entity, self as a dependently originated being or individual, must be also extended to our understanding of other sentient beings. Again, sentient beings or others are designations that are dependent upon the bodily and mental existence of other sentient, other beings. On the basis of aggregates, what the Buddhists called the various levels of aggregates of which is the psychophysical constituents of the beings.
Yeah. Other teddy that's any simja that the Zajabuts, Jibuts, that Jibuchadandi, the members of ten. Tang to them the compassion is the idea, courage, pitchiness, that didn't do your marry. Down the day. Count to Sudan drop and say, don't you go in a man dashing? Shall somebody talk with Charles Jevons and Bushos? Jevons and down there, our membership there. 양은 냠발을 때가 뭐인가 랑 끌래 멤발 때니 뒤에 대비 고말 꿀 초도 꿀 라말 꿀니 아니 찍도 잡아지고 그래서 시작해 아디샤 계속
So the second verse reads, whenever and with whomever I associate, may I see myself as lower than all others, and from the depth of my heart may I consider them supremely precious. So having made the point in the first verse, the need to develop the thought, cultivate the thought of regarding others as, all other sentient beings as precious, in the second verse, the point that is being made here is that this recognition of the preciousness of other sentient beings and the sense of caring that you develop on that basis should not be grounded in a feeling of pity towards other sentient beings, in some sense thinking that they are inferior, they are kind of worthy of our pity. Rather, what is being emphasized here is a sense of caring and sense of recognition of their preciousness based on a sense of reverence towards other sentient beings. And this sense of reverence towards other sentient beings can be cultivated if you have the thought or recognition of taking other sentient beings as, in some sense, object worthy of reverence. They are superior objects. They are objects to whom you can show reverence and respect and so on.
다대한다 닝지세다디 그래서 몽고지도 kenjim을 장서 다이나다 사바드는 같이 여러 가버려 생기 제니다 참바스럽나 대화도 된도 대화도 되나 사바지 닝지스럽도 동에도 되나 사바지 제 현재 남주 다진에게 다 닝지디 동에도 되나 사베 닝지디 조조데 파르보 동해면도 받아 대원대 봐. 딩문진 기타네 아니 동해의 자나사벨로디 또 도스르샤 마도야 딩알이야 팬다 내 저부인스 디균제도 셔야 동해의 자나사벨로디 해지 착배왕 거 용거야래 지상 그 착배왕 거로 지고 이거 대속에 다운돼 용돼야지 그님도 들어와 지르산에 딘데기 착받은 데 댕에기 지다 동해의 자나사벨로디 지글이야 동해 중나사벨로지 다 하는 야기 냥가 때 요래 그래서 이 메뉴는 꼭 초그려 차대 요래 그래서 다 안데 주제닝지 그래서라나 동해의 자나사벨로 그래서라나 그냥 봐지 탐찰러리야 초그려면 다 동해의 자나사벨로 진용을 깨야지 지식도 깨야지 다 딕종구 요라 그래서 이 메뉴잖아요 나도 남주지 love compassion sense so 간여로 알려 지게 돼 봤다 디상단데 딜은 문제 지금이 도와 디 초려래 착받은 데베래 자 착받은 데베 되게 신한 테마탈 내용 그래 그래서 안 되디